Hi there, my name is Chloe Henderson and welcome to Fluffy Jellyfish. Today I'm going to be introducing you to Toothless and Shenron. Toothless and Shenron are two adorable little rat kittens that we could not pass up the opportunity of having in our family. After the passing of sweet little Smaug and Drogon, myself and Stuart were starting to talk about adding a couple of new babies to our mischief of rats to balance out the age dynamics of the group. And on a recent trip to Pets at Home, we were stopped in our tracks by these stunning boys. They were in the adoption section. It felt a little meant to be, and we inquired about their story. It turns out they were an accidental litter within the store itself, and therefore had to be put up for adoption rather than being sold. But we didn't want to impulse buy these babies, and we made the decision not to rush. So we went home that night to have a proper talk about taking them on, and decided that we were ready. And if they were still in the rescue the next evening, we'd be taking them home. As you might have already guessed, they were still there. Toothless is the silky black boy with a white belly, and Shenron is the light cream and white curly rat. I'm so in love with them already, and I'm really enjoying seeing their little personalities develop. So they were in quarantine for 3 months, which might sound like a long time, but we wanted to give them enough time to settle into their new surroundings. So what is quarantining? Quarantining is where you put the rats that you've just got into a separate cage in a completely different airspace from your other rats. You either need to do this when you bring home new rats, or because your rats have been to the vet, or perhaps you've taken them to a small annual pet show. Whatever your reason, it is important to assess the risk and use that to decide if you need to quarantine your rats and for how long. It is important to do this with new rats, as you don't know if they have illnesses that could be passed on to your existing mischief. It also gives you time to assess their health and get to know their personalities and give them time to settle and get used to you. Our taming process with Toothless and Shenron started from the first day that we brought them home. The employee who served us was not very confident at handling the rats and mostly chased them around with a cardboard box to get them out, which was very unsuccessful. After awkwardly watching him do this for a while, I asked if I could try to get them into our carrier. It took a bit of manoeuvring to get into position as the cages in Pets at Home are not set out very well, but I managed to quite easily scoop up Toothless and pop them into our carrier. Shenron was a lot more nervous and it took me longer to coax him out, but I eventually managed to scoop him up. When we got them back, our spare cage was already set up. From here, our taming process was gentle and slow. We started off with in-cage socialization, where we'd place our hands in the cage and allow them to sniff us, and when they were calm, we would stroke their backs. Toothless was really curious straight away and would climb onto our hands, but Shenron took a little more convincing. Both of them are great though, we were quite quickly starting to pick them out and take them outside of the cage. They love coming out for free roaming, and while Shenron's still a little nervous, he seems to be getting on just great. Toothless loves being out for free roam, and he popcorns all over the place to show us how excited he is. So after their 3 months of quarantine and getting used to us and getting used to their new surroundings, I'm confident that they're now ready to be introduced to the rest of the mischief. A quick little disclaimer before I start off these intro diaries. This vlog is an example of how we did our rat introductions. I'm using this to document my process and I hope you find it informative and helpful. However, while this method may work for my rats, it might not work for yours. Always do your research and make sure you're prepared. We're using the carrier method to introduce our rats. Isumi Rats has a fantastic post all about this and I'll drop a link in the description below. In short, the carrier method is a process of using different size spaces from small to large to introduce your rats in a confined and neutral space. Our first step was to place the two cages next to each other, close enough that they can see and smell each other, but not too close that they could reach through the bars to touch each other. This step is to get the rats accustomed to each other's smell and to introduce the idea of the other rats to each group. We did this first thing in the morning, just after both groups had finished their breakfast, and we left them like this for 2 hours. Next step was to place everyone in our smallest carrier. This carrier does not leave much room for the rats to move around or settle properly, so we decided we only wanted to leave them in here for 30 minutes to an hour maximum. This cramped space would allow their scents to mix and acclimatise them to each other quickly, while not giving them enough space to fight or hurt each other. We let the top 2 rats, Haku and Alduin, meet the babies first. There was a lot of curious sniffing of each other, with no fluffing up or posturing. We did this on a cool day in the morning before our heating was turned on to ensure they did not overheat in this box, and I made sure they always had water to access at every stage. We then slowly added the rest of the mischief, and I sat with them for around 45 minutes to monitor their behaviour. There were a few small squeaks during this time, but it's most likely just due to them dawdling around in the box, and I wasn't worried. Next step was to move them from the tiny carrier to a larger cat carrier. This carrier is big enough to allow them all to lie down and move around a little, but still small enough that they have to cuddle up together or interact with each other. I laid this carrier with a comfy towel and scattered some of their regular food mix as well as a bunch of treat foods. They all seemed really calm with each other and there was no behavioural signs of stress or potential fighting, all was going wonderfully smoothly so far. It was mid-afternoon when we put them into this carrier and we decided to leave them in here overnight with supervision. It is a little cramped and boring for them in this box, so instead of feeding them their full amount of food all in one go, we decided to feed them smaller portions throughout the day, as well as giving them some extra treat foods. This gave them something to do and stopped them from getting too bored. Myself and Stuart took shifts throughout the night to watch over them, but they were perfect and we only heard a few minor squeaks. So the next morning we moved them from the cat carrier to a small hamster cage. A bird cage like this is great for intros because you can easily see what's going on inside. We lined it with a fresh pile of their regular Obio substrate and scattered some breakfast for them to enjoy. This cage would give them enough space to distance themselves from each other or separate out into their two groups, so it's a good indicator of whether they're forming bonds or not. If they start to separate out too much, we would know that they need to go back a stage, but if they start to cuddle up, we know that they're beginning to bond. At this stage, we observed them just after the initial move, and then left them to get on with things themselves. We knew we needed to leave them alone, but still wanted to be in earshot just in case any fights broke out. Rats can pick up on human stress and anxiety, so it's a good idea to give them some separation during this period. They were getting on really well, and there were no signs of aggressive or even defensive behaviour, so really happy to see them bonding. We were so pleased when we came back in the afternoon to see them all sleeping together in fluffy cuddle piles. We decided to leave them overnight in this smaller cage just to ensure that we did not disturb this bonding too much by rushing to move them onto a larger space. I scatter fed them in the evening and gave them some veggies to munch on just before we went to bed. This time we left them in the hallway outside our bedroom. This way we could still hear them, but they're able to settle without us being there to interrupt them. The next morning we moved them from the small cage onto our smaller rat cage, and we gave them a couple of chew toys as enrichment. This cage gives them a lot more space, so we'd be able to see if the bonding would still happen in this bigger space. And also the toys would give us a chance to see if any of the rats were becoming territorial or aggressive. During the initial move, we distracted them by scattering monkey nuts for them to munch on while exploring their new surroundings. There was a little bit of pinning behaviour from some of the older boys and Toothless. They'd obviously pegged him as being the more dominant of the two, and they were putting him in his place. Toothless seemed to be happy to submit to them, which would hopefully mean that they were establishing their hierarchies. Shenron still seemed a bit nervous around the older boys and would run away if they tried to pin him down, but he was more happy to join the cuddle piles than Toothless. We've decided that if Toothless continues to distance himself and Shenron continues to run from conflict, that we might have to put them back a stage. However, if they continue to show signs of bonding, we'll likely keep them in the smaller rat cage for a few days to continue to bond, and we'll slowly test them by adding other toys and hammocks. The next morning we added in a few hammocks and some more toys for them. They were really excited and explored all of the hammocks straight away, and we went out for the day and left them all to it. We came back and all 9 rats were in one hammock, so I think it's safe to say that adding the hammocks was a good idea. I think they slept like this for most of the day. It must have been quite hot in there, so they had a little bit of separation throughout the day, but the two groups are still intermixing well, so we're happy that things are going so well. I was at home in the afternoon and was able to catch a few significant moments of positive behaviour from them during this stage. I saw Mushu pinning Toothless and Toothless submitted to him. I've also seen a few dominance scuffles throughout this process, mostly between Haku and Toothless. While you might worry about your rats fighting, these scuffles are a good sign, as it shows that they're establishing where they are in the hierarchy of the group. Even if they are puffy and posturizing, you want to let them get these fights out and only break them up if you're worried about injury. The sort of general rule that people stick to is no blood, no foul. I also noticed some sign of grooming, which is so adorable. I was so happy to see this. Grooming is an important form of bonding for rats, and seeing this starting to happen between the two groups is a great sign. As they've been stuck in that small cage for 3 days now, with only a little bit of enrichment, we decided that they needed a free roam session. We limited this first free roam session to only 30 minutes and made sure we had plenty of snacks for them. There were a few more dominant squabbles in this larger space, but it was fairly tame and we weren't too worried, and it was mostly just between Haku and Toothless. Toothless would fight against Haku at first, but he would always submit, so that was quite a good sign for us. This free roam session went so well that the next morning we decided to move them into the big main cage. We separated our main cage into 2 sections so it was still a smaller space for them to interact in. We added a few enrichment toys and a few climbing rows, but decided not to put any hammocks or hides for this first night to ensure that they would sleep together. Also, if they decided to fight in this bigger space, we did not want anyone to get injured or trapped inside a hammock. I was a little concerned the next morning as I saw Toothless sleeping by himself away from the rest, although Shenron was continuing to cuddle up with the others. I was worried about Toothless. I didn't want him to separate himself too much from the other boys, as it would mean any bonding that was done in the previous stages would end up meaning nothing. I left them to their naps because I wanted them to chill out during the day, but if Toothless continues to distance himself, we knew that we'd have to move them back a few stages. Sometimes a big part of introductions is being able to read your rats and figure out if they can move on to the next stage or in fact move back a stage. I was working from home during the day, so I kept popping in to see how they were doing, and I was really pleased to see in the afternoon that Toothless was cuddling up with all the boys. In fact, all of them piled into their litter trays and decided that that would be the best place for them to make beds. But it's great because at least Toothless was in there with him. Over the next couple of days, we slowly added more toys, hides and hammocks into the cage, as well as opening up the bottom half so they had full access to the cage. We noticed a few minor fights, but nothing for us to be overly worried about, and Toothless was starting to intermix perfectly. We're so pleased that it's gone so well. We seem to have successfully introduced Toothless and Shenron to Original Mischief, and fingers crossed it's gone so perfectly so far. It's gone really well so far, but Toothless occasionally still distances himself from the other rats, but I'm optimistically confident that these intros have been a success. We will continue to add accessories into the cage until it's back to normal, as well as continuing to free roam the mischief. I think the carrier method works really well for introducing new rats to your established mischief. It's a technique we've used now 3 times and has worked almost perfectly for us each time. When working with animals, nothing ever runs completely smoothly, but I think this method really helps to mitigate potential introduction issues. The process of introducing rats can be quite daunting to new rat parents, and I remember feeling really overwhelmed the first time we went through our intros. The carrier method can help to ease some of the stresses, as you can keep in mind that you can always go back a stage if things don't quite work out the first time, and there are plenty of tips and tricks to help you out. A great resource for if you're having issues is to join a Facebook group or forum for rat owners. These can be really valuable resources for getting information and asking questions when you're struggling, as well as being a source of support. However, remember to take some of the advice with a pinch of salt, and remember that not everybody agrees with each other when it comes to animal care. Ask your questions in a few different sources and compare results to make sure you're getting the best information. My favourite resources for rat care are Isimu Rats and Emiology, and I would highly recommend checking out their information if you're a new rat parent. I'll leave their links in the description below. Their content really helped me out when I first started out with my rats. Shenron and Toothless are now fully integrated into our mischief, and they're getting on really well with the older boys. Toothless has recently been suffering from a bit of a nasty respiratory infection and has lost a bit of weight. He seems to be through the worst of his illness and is getting back to eating normally again, and he no longer sounds croaky. We were a bit worried about him for a bit, and I started to panic because he wouldn't eat. Luckily he's back to eating, but it's a struggle to get his medication into him as he won't eat outside of the cage. But we found our solution, and that's to feed him his medication just after our free roam session. We keep the rest of the boys in the carrier for a few minutes, and we place Toothless into the empty cage to eat his meds, which we mix with malt paste, and he seems to go a bit crazy for that. Toothless is starting to recover and is slowly starting to put weight back on again, but I'm a little worried that this is going to stunt his growth. Shenron and Toothless are both quite small, and I think this is probably due to their background. But at least Shenron's starting to put on a bit of weight and he's becoming a little bit of a chunk. You can barely tell the difference between him and some of the smaller boys in our group. Toothless and Shenron are progressing really well with us and with the rest of the mischief, and it's one big happy family and I'm so pleased. I love our Rattos so much. If you do too and want to keep up with the adventures of our mischief, be sure to hit that subscribe button and you'll never miss an update from us. That's all from me and the Rattos just now. Much love, Fluffy Jellyfish out.